Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Mendte. A dangerous chemical has been found in schools and it's not getting a lot of attention. Our next guest would like to change that. Debra Coyle McFadden is the Executive Director for New Jersey Work Environment Council. Thanks so much for being here. Before we get to the chemical, what is the New Jersey Work Environment Council?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So we are a nonprofit organization. We're in New Jersey, and we're a coalition of 70 labor, community, environmental organizations and individuals. And we really work on issues where the nexus of the labor movement, environmental movement come together. We work on issues of consensus, and a primary focus of ours is preventing toxic exposures.
Talk about toxic exposure. You told me about something that I hadn't heard about before and has not been getting a lot of attention. You would like to call more attention to this. It is a chemical in our schools.
That's right. So we know right now in our schools a big focus has been lead in our water, which it should be, but there's also unfortunately another hazard, and that is mercury vapor from floors. There are rubber-like floors that are poured in place, and a catalyst that's used, we've found that over time is releasing mercury. And you can find these floors in schools, maybe in gyms, all-purpose rooms. You can find them community centers, long-term care facilities, because they're soft. So if you fall, it gives you a little bit of a cushion. You can also find them in outdoor playgrounds as well.
How much mercury? Because the danger's in the amount, right?
So the danger is in the exposure. There's no safe level of mercury, and particularly for kids that are developing, mercury is very hazardous to them, and also to women of childbearing age. And if you have autism, there's been reports that show that it's harder for your body to, once you have a heavy metal in it, to release the heavy metal. And you don't know what the level is, and that's why you have to do the testing. So the first thing we have to do is find out how many floors are in our schools. So you need to do a survey, and that's easy enough to walk in and look at the floor and say, hey, is this one of these floors? And if it is, then you need to do bulk sample testing. And that's just literally taking a sample of the floor, you send it out to a lab. It's not a very expensive test. And then that will tell you if this catalyst is in there that's releasing mercury. And then if you have that, then the next step would be how much mercury is being released from the floor.
But before any of that can happen, people would have to know about it.
That's right.
This is really the first time I've heard this. Why is that?
That's a really good question. It's an issue that we've been working and sounding the alarm on for more than 2 years now. We've been working with partners and allies. Alerts have gone out to schools about this hazard. I think slowly there's been an education process. And right now we know at least there's 20 districts that are looking at their floors, whether or not they have mercury.
But they're not required to report it, right? I mean, who are they telling if they find it?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think one that we would like to see the state of New Jersey. As I said, I think the first step would be to have a reporting requirement, similar to what we did around lead a few years back, where the schools had to test their water for lead.
And didn't.
Well, some did not, yes. Some did, some didn't report. And then just to have that database and that survey to see where these schools are. I think that's really the first step to identify the problem.
But I will get back to the lead for a second, because the reason I said and didn't is because we were at the lab that was doing the testing, and he said they're not sending anything up. And there was no follow-up to that, it seemed like. There was no penalty for not doing that. If you go after the mercury, if you go after the lead, there has to have some teeth in it, right?
I agree, and I think we could look back and take lessons learned from the executive order that was issued around lead. I mean, like you said, the reporting, people did the tests differently, the ones that did do the test, so we need to have uniform standards for reporting, and I think there does need to be a penalty if you do not do it.
I think when people hear about this, there will be a push for it. Where would you start? I mean, does your organization, are you going to Trenton? Are you pushing them for this? Yes,
we are. We are pushing, again, I mean, the way that we see this issue being solved is first is the education piece, and we need to identify where these floors are. Then you would need to do sampling of the floor, and then you would need to test the air, and depending if mercury is released, that's how you could either mitigate the hazard in place, or you could replace the floor. I mean, it's always safer to replace the hazard, then you get rid of it, and you know that the floor is safe.
Is this something like the lead, where it's only in buildings that are older or only in floors that are older?
So unfortunately, my answer is no. We have found floors installed as late as 2006 that have contained a mercury catalyst. That's why you can't go by the date of the installation. Like with the lead, you can look back. We know lead solder was used a lot, in the earlier use. It's not the same thing with the floors. You have to do the testing. And you can't look at the MSDS sheet for the floor because mercury may not be listed. So that's why the testing is a really critical piece of this.
I want to talk about, it's the same topic in general. I want to talk about a story out of Massachusetts where they were doing some cleaning, a whole crew was doing some cleaning at a Buffalo Wild Wings restaurant, and because of a mix of chemicals, cleaning solutions, the manager died from toxic exposure and 13 people were injured. Is that, it sounds like it's an anomaly. Of course, the results are an anomaly, but it sounds like the cleaning supplies are pretty common.
So sadly, this is not an anomaly. We have, part of the work that we do is health and safety training. And this is a case that I think that you need to look at the training requirements of the employer. So OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has a standard. It's called the Hazardous Communication Standard. So if your employees are working with chemicals, they're supposed to be trained on those chemicals. And it sounds like that this is something that could have been prevented had a good training program been in place.
What were the chemicals?
So the chemicals, the basic components of the chemical were ammonia and bleach, and when you mix them, it creates a chlorine cloud, which is extremely toxic.
They're in people's homes.
They are in people's homes, so I think that would be a takeaway message for me, is that although if in your workplace, if you work with chemicals, you're supposed to be trained, but we have these chemicals in our home, cleaning our bathroom. You never mix chemicals, and particularly never mix bleach. It's a very deadly and dangerous component.
You have all of these issues that we're looking at. You started telling me about it. The mercury jumped out at me. Yeah. We've dealt with the Massachusetts thing. We only have a short time left. Is there something else important that you want to get out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think one thing that we're looking at too now is New Jersey, we have a robust chemical industry. And the other issue that we're facing right now is climate change. In New Jersey, we're already starting to see the impacts. So we want to be sure, we don't want toxic releases from our workplaces. We want to protect the workers, the environment, and we want to make sure as we're looking at this changing climate, whether it's extreme weather events, whether it's sea level rise, to make sure that we don't have releases from flooding. Because when we flood, there's a chance for releases there as well, toxic releases. We saw it in Newark, and we also saw during Sandy there were toxic releases.
Into the air or into the water?
Into the water, into the water. And it creates a toxic brew.
Yeah, there was toxins in the water. Did anything happen as a result of that? I mean, did anybody get sick? Was there
I mean,
problems?
there were exposures in Newark. It's hard to say who got sick from the chemicals or who didn't get sick. There wasn't a tracking mechanism
can't track.
in place.
It's hard to track, right?
That's
once it goes into there. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
It's good to talk to you. Thanks for making us aware of the mercury. Debra Coyle McFadden, Executive Director for New Jersey Work Environment Council. Jersey Matters continues right after this. When we come back on Jersey Matters, how a bag full of blessings is changing lives in New Jersey.